The story takes place in the family of Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, an elderly woman living in a quiet suburban area of New Hampshire. Her family has long valued traditional principles such as close family bonds, mutual respect, and a healthy, grounded way of life. Mrs. Brooks has 4 sons, and remarkably, all 4 of them got married in the same year. What made the situation especially interesting was that her 4 daughters-in-law came from completely different backgrounds, creating a clear contrast between modern urban lifestyles and traditional small-town values. The 2 older daughters-in-law, Madison and Lauren, were raised in major cities like New York City and San Francisco. They grew up in affluent environments, surrounded by high-end fashion, social media, parties, and a mindset that emphasized individual freedom. To them, self-expression was everything, especially through clothing choices and lifestyle. In contrast, the other 2 daughters-in-law, Rachel and Claire, came from small towns in Nebraska and Missouri. They were raised in working-class families and were accustomed to a simple, practical way of life, placing greater importance on family relationships than on outward appearances. From the very first day all 4 daughters-in-law entered their new home, the differences were impossible to miss. Madison and Lauren arrived wearing fitted, stylish dresses with intricate designs, high heels, and bold makeup, projecting confidence and a modern edge. Meanwhile, Rachel and Claire chose loose-fitting cotton dresses in soft, neutral colors, wore little to no makeup, and gave off a warm, down-to-earth impression. These contrasts created an atmosphere that was both curious and slightly awkward within the family. Mrs. Brooks, viewing the situation through the lens of a traditional mother-in-law, had no intention of judging wealth or background, but she could not hide her concern. She understood that becoming part of a family meant more than simply sharing a roof. It required harmony in lifestyle and behavior. However, even during their first conversations, Madison and Lauren unintentionally revealed a dismissive attitude toward the simplicity of Rachel and Claire. They viewed modest clothing and a slower, small-town way of life as outdated and lacking personality. In contrast, Rachel and Claire did not argue or defend themselves. Instead, they chose to remain quiet, observe their surroundings, and try to adapt to their new environment. To them, becoming daughters-in-law in a large family was a responsibility that required patience and respect. They believed that a person's clothing or background did not define their worth. What truly mattered was one's attitude toward life. The contrast extended beyond clothing and became clearly visible in daily routines. Madison and Lauren were used to a fast-paced lifestyle, relying on takeout food, grab-and-go coffee, and weekend parties. They frequently shared moments from their lives on social media and placed great importance on personal image and self-presentation. Meanwhile, Rachel and Claire preferred cooking at home, choosing fresh ingredients, maintaining a balanced routine, and spending time talking with family members. This unintentionally created 2 parallel worlds under the same roof. One was a world of city lights, fashion, and individualism. The other was a world of simplicity, practicality, and family connection. Relatives and neighbors alike began comparing the 2 groups of daughters-in-law. Interestingly, over time, attention gradually shifted away from flashy appearances and toward behavior and everyday attitudes. Madison and Lauren, though eye-catching and impressive at first glance, often became the source of tension because of their overly free-spirited lifestyle and lack of consideration for shared family spaces. In contrast, Rachel and Claire slowly earned goodwill through their hard work, humility, and willingness to support the family. This contrast highlighted a broader social truth. In a multi-generational household, harmony does not come from who is more modern, but from who is able to respect others and adapt. After the first few days of living together in the quiet suburban home of the Brooks family in New Hampshire, the differences among the four daughters-in-law went far beyond background or clothing style. They gradually revealed deeper differences in values and life philosophies. At the heart of the tension was not wealth versus poverty or city versus countryside, but how each woman understood and defined what it means to be modern and what the value of a woman is in contemporary American society. For Madison and Lauren, who grew up in major cities like New York City and Los Angeles, being modern meant absolute freedom above all else. Freedom in how they dressed, how they lived, how they enjoyed life, and how they placed themselves above traditional social expectations. They believed that a modern woman should not be constrained by family obligations or traditional norms. To them, fashion was not merely clothing, it was a personal statement. The bolder and more unconventional it was, the more it proved confidence, strength, and individuality. For this reason, when living with the Brooks family, where Mrs. Eleanor Brooks still maintained traditional habits such as shared family meals, regular daily routines, and attentiveness toward one another, Madison and Lauren felt as though they were being restricted. They did not see these practices as care, but as interference. Even Mrs. Brooks's gentle reminders about eating properly, resting on time, or dressing appropriately for certain situations were often interpreted by them as control or even as outdated and conservative thinking. In contrast, Rachel and Claire, who had grown up in the American Midwest, saw things very differently. To them, being modern did not mean rejecting tradition. They believed that a woman could be independent, outspoken, and ambitious while still valuing family, listening to those with more life experience, and taking responsibility for her choices. For Rachel and Claire, true freedom was not about doing whatever one pleased, but about understanding the consequences of one's actions and being willing to accept responsibility. These differences in perspective gradually became evident in everyday life. Madison and Lauren frequently ordered takeout, drank wine in the evenings, and hosted weekend gatherings with friends. They viewed this as enjoying life, something they believed a modern woman fully deserved. Meanwhile, Rachel and Claire spent time cooking at home, choosing healthy ingredients, and prioritizing shared family meals. They did not see this as a sacrifice, but as a natural and meaningful part of family life. Tensions reached a peak when Madison and Lauren became pregnant. To them, pregnancy did not change how they saw themselves. They still wanted to maintain an image that was stylish, energetic, and attractive. Tight-fitting dresses, high heels, and social events remained an essential part of their lives. They believed that a pregnant woman's body should be celebrated and that no one had the right to tell them how to dress or how to live. However, it was at this point that Madison and Lauren's idea of being modern began to reveal its dangerous limits. While Rachel and Claire proactively adjusted their lifestyles, wearing loose clothing, reducing physical strain, eating balanced meals, and getting more rest, Madison and Lauren dismissed such advice as unnecessary exaggeration. They believed modern medicine could handle any potential risks, and that their lifestyle choices would not seriously affect their unborn children. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, as both a mother and a soon-to-be grandmother, did not oppose her daughters-in-law's desire for freedom. What truly worried her was not short dresses or bold makeup, but their casual attitude toward the responsibilities of motherhood. In many conversations, she tried to explain that taking care of oneself during pregnancy was not a loss of independence or feminism, but rather the highest expression of love and responsibility. However, her words rarely reached Madison and Lauren, who had long equated personal freedom with self-worth. Through the contrast between the two pairs of daughters-in-law, the story raises a broader question in contemporary American society. Has the idea of being modern, or even feminist, been misunderstood as the rejection of all boundaries? A modern woman does not have to choose between herself and her family, or between tradition and freedom. The problem arises when freedom becomes the sole goal, causing people to forget that every role in life, especially the role of a mother, comes with responsibilities that cannot be avoided. In the Brooks household, the final months of pregnancy were no longer the peaceful period Mrs. Brooks had once hoped for. The differences in values among the four daughters-in-law, previously quiet, underlying tensions, began to produce real and unavoidable consequences. As a pregnant woman's body enters its most sensitive stage, every personal choice, from clothing and daily habits to diet, ceases to be a purely individual matter and becomes directly tied to the safety of another life. Madison, the first of the two city-raised daughters-in-law to become pregnant, entered her 8th month with an attitude that had barely changed. She maintained a busy schedule, continued attending social events, and refused to give up the form-fitting fashion style she considered central to her identity. In Madison's mind, pregnancy was not a reason to fade into the background or lose the energetic, glamorous image she had carefully built. She believed modern medicine was advanced enough to protect both her and her baby, regardless of the lifestyle she chose to maintain. In contrast, Rachel and Claire entered the final stage of pregnancy with a completely different mindset. They intentionally slowed down their pace of life, spent more time resting, and paid close attention to the changes in their bodies. To them, adjusting their lifestyle was not a personal sacrifice, but a natural expression of maternal instinct. They understood that their bodies were no longer serving only themselves, but had become the first environment in which their babies would grow. This contrast became especially clear during an important family event, the baby shower held at the Brooks family home. Mrs. Eleanor Brooks had hoped the gathering would be a joyful occasion for the entire family to celebrate and offer blessings to the babies soon to arrive. However, for Madison and Lauren, the party also became a stage to showcase their personal style. They arrived wearing tight, boldly designed dresses, high heels, and elaborate makeup. Their outfits drew immediate attention, but not in the way they had expected. Many guests, especially older relatives, could not hide their concern. It was not that they objected to modern fashion, but that they clearly saw the discomfort on the two women's faces when they sat down, stood up, or moved around. In contrast, Rachel and Claire chose loose, soft dresses that supported their pregnant bellies and allowed their bodies to remain comfortable. The difference created a tense atmosphere at the party, as if two opposing views on life were confronting each other in the same space. The turning point came before the celebration had even ended. Madison suddenly began experiencing severe abdominal pain and shortness of breath. At first, she tried to stay calm, assuming it was just normal fatigue, but only minutes later, panic set in when she realized there were alarming signs that her water had begun to leak. The mood in the room changed instantly. Laughter, joy, and congratulations were replaced by fear and anxiety. The family rushed Madison to the nearest hospital. There, doctors confirmed that her condition was serious and required emergency surgery. The cause could not be attributed to a single factor, but a high-stress lifestyle, tight clothing, and failure to follow medical recommendations during pregnancy were all considered to have increased the risks. The baby was born earlier than expected and required special monitoring due to a fragile condition. As Madison lay in her hospital bed, facing the vulnerability of her newborn child, she experienced for the first time the true weight of motherhood. The choices she had once seen as expressions of personal freedom now appeared to her as poorly considered decisions. The realization came late, but it was powerful enough to make her question how she had lived throughout her pregnancy. Almost at the same time, Rachel began showing signs of labor. Unlike Madison's situation, Rachel's delivery went relatively smoothly. Thanks to a balanced routine and careful preparation, she gave birth naturally, and her baby was healthy. The contrast between the two births was not merely a medical difference, but a clear illustration of how lifestyle choices and attitudes during pregnancy can shape outcomes. For Mrs. Eleanor Brooks, everything that happened that day was a mix of joy and heartbreak. She was grateful to welcome her grandchildren into the world, yet deeply saddened by the danger one of her daughters-in-law had faced. Still, she did not blame or criticize anyone. Instead, she chose silence and presence, understanding that the most powerful lessons do not come from words, but from lived experience, especially the one Madison had just endured. After the incident at the hospital, the atmosphere in the Brooks household changed, quietly but profoundly. The unspoken tensions, comparing glances, and subtle judgments that once lingered in the background slowly faded. In their place came calm reflection and a growing sense of understanding among family members. What had happened forced everyone, especially the daughters-in-law, to look inward and reconsider how they defined happiness, freedom, and responsibility within family life. Madison, once confident and even proud of her modern lifestyle, now lay beside a small crib in the recovery room. Watching her tiny daughter resting in a neonatal incubator under close medical supervision, she felt for the first time the fragility of the life she had carried and brought into the world. In those quiet hours, Madison no longer thought about fashion, parties, or social media images. Instead, she began questioning the choices she had once taken for granted, choices she had defended in the name of personal freedom. Madison's transformation was neither dramatic nor loud. It unfolded slowly and sincerely. She listened carefully to her doctor's advice, paid closer attention to her meals and rest, and more importantly, learned to listen to the people around her, something she had rarely done before. Lauren, witnessing her sister-in-law's ordeal and realizing that her own due date was approaching, also began to reflect on her lifestyle. She came to understand that being modern does not mean ignoring all boundaries, and that feminism does not require rejecting every piece of advice offered out of genuine care. Meanwhile, Rachel and Claire showed no sense of pride or superiority over what had happened. Instead, they offered quiet, steady support, taking turns cooking, helping care for the baby, and sharing household responsibilities. Their calm, non-judgmental attitude became a bridge that helped the family navigate this sensitive period. They understood that growth takes time, and that compassion can sometimes be more powerful than any lecture. Mrs. Brooks, as both a mother-in-law and a grandmother, played a central role in this healing process. She never resorted to phrases like, "I told you so," or "you were wrong." Instead, she led with patience and kindness. To her, family was not a place to prove who was right or wrong, but a place to learn how to live better together after hardship. She understood that tradition without flexibility can make a family rigid, just as modernity without responsibility or boundaries can leave a family lost. The months that followed unfolded with a new rhythm of life. Madison and Lauren gradually adjusted their daily habits, not because they were forced to, but because they had truly come to understand what motherhood meant. Rachel and Claire, in turn, learned that being modern was not something foreign to them. It could mean staying informed about medical knowledge, taking better, more science-based care of themselves, and speaking up when necessary. Between two perspectives that had once clashed sharply, a sense of balance slowly began to take shape. As the babies were born one by one, the Brooks home became warmer than ever. The sound of newborn cries, sleepless nights, and the small joys of everyday life erased the line between city daughters-in-law and small-town daughters-in-law. In motherhood, everyone stood on equal ground, facing the same worries, sacrifices, and deep love for their children. It was this shared experience that bonded them in a way no earlier debate ever could. On a deeper level, the story reminds us that maturity does not come from always being right, but from the ability to recognize mistakes and be willing to change. No one in the Brooks family was perfect, but through conflict, hardship, and growing understanding, they slowly became a true family, one where each individual was respected yet never separated from shared responsibility.